In the year 2014, two important emergent spiritual forces came into my life. First, I attended my first Unitarian Universalist service in San Marcos, Texas, as a naive but interested searcher for truth in me. When I saw the 7 principles, I knew in my heart that my searching had met with success. The second awareness came when I received a copy of John O'Donoghue's book on Kara. It's Gaelic for the words soul friend. His words immediately provoked in me a recognition of an articulation of human relations that I had only a mild insight into. I wanted more and more over the years, and have come to recognize John and his writings as a person I had wished I had known while he was alive. While he was still living in human form, he was a noted author, poet, spiritual thinker, and writer. He has inspired people all over the world through his poetry and writings, primarily those of us that seek to know the mystical spirit that lives in all of us. He is quoted frequently in gatherings all over the Western world, including UU services. For those of you who attended the architects meeting several weeks ago now, the architects quoted a blessing at the end of their presentation, which was a blessing written by, yes, John O'Donoghue. Many of you may have Celtic history. How many of you have Irish, Scottish history? Thank you. Well, it's interesting because if you come from that ancestry, you are blessed to have Celtic blood in you. And I use the word Celtic because when you're referring to the culture, for those of you who know, that is the pronunciation is Celtic. It's not the Boston Celtics or the Boston Celtic. It's the Boston Celtics. So when you're referring to the basketball team, it's the Celtics. When you're referring to Irish, Scottish history and the tribes that live there, you're referring to the Celts. Some of you may know that I have Irish background. Look at me. I am an O'Donnell on my mother's side, descended from Irish kings in northwestern Ireland in the town of Donegal. Especially some of you that know also that I'm full of Barney and have a rather strong penchant for telling stories. Right, Deb?
Yeah.
Perhaps this, along with John's lyrical Irish brogue and deep exploration of the spirit that lives in each of us, is why I'm so drawn to John O'Donoghue. The facts of his life are that he was born in County Clare on January 1st, 1956, and he died peacefully on January 4th, 2008, in Avignon, France. He was the oldest of 4, and he was raised on a rural farm where Gaelic was spoken as in the house. He studied for the priesthood beginning at age 12 and remained in that profession until the year 2000. He often said that becoming a priest was the most important thing that happened to him, and the second most important thing was when he left the priesthood. He received his PhD in philosophical theology in 1990 in Germany doing his dissertation on Hegel, those of you that have a philosophical bent, and subsequently became rather enamored of the work of Meister Eckhart. So if you're interested in the philosophical aspect of John O'Donohue, that's his spiritual mentors. While his priestly duties took most of his time, he began to devote himself to writing, primarily on the spirit within each of us. His first book, Anankara, that I mentioned means soul friend, was published in 1997 and became an overnight international bestseller. Following this success, he felt the desire to continue to write and speak to a worldwide audience. This led him to come into conflict with his role as a parish priest. His bishop wanted him to remain true to his priestly duties while he wanted to write and speak, and this led him to resign the priesthood in 2000. From that time until his death in 2008, John published a number of books and essays. Some of the more popular ones are Connemara Blues, Divine Beauty. Those of you that took the Finding Heart group on beauty know that we use Divine Beauty as one of our sources. And even though he valued his solitude, and was a very humble man, he became a highly sought-after speaker all over the world on behalf of social, environmental, and spiritual causes. His main topic in many of his talks focused on how we miss beauty in our life, how we need to create, how we need to become more creative and imaginative, and the way that we see beauty in everyday life. Beyond the facts of his life, did he walk the talk? He was a deep thinker and loved the lyrical nature of descriptive words. He loved his solitude, choosing to live in rural Western Ireland in the Burren, which is a word that means a rather wild natural landscape of County Clare west of Galway. Many sources talk about how he listened and loved the slow, deep conversation while sipping good fire water, Irish whiskey. Those who were fortunate enough to share time with him often came away transformed from his words and actions. There are stories of him spontaneously issuing blessings of great eloquence on the spot in response to a trouble that a friend might have. After hearing him on a radio recording, I came to believe it was not only the content of his words, but the beautifully descriptive lyrical language spoken in his Irish brogue that enthralled listeners all over the world. Here's a sample from an interview with Krista Tippett from her NPR radio show On Being. Ricky, if you'll play that for the audience.
John O'Donohue was an Irish poet and philosopher, beloved for his books, including Anankara, Gaelic for soul friend, and for his insistence on beauty as a human calling and a defining aspect of God. I sat down with John O'Donohue in our studios in the fall of 2007. Then, just a few months later, before our interview could go to air, he died in his sleep at the age of 52. And so this hour of radio has become a remembrance of him. At the same time, John O'Donohue had a very Celtic, lifelong fascination with what he called the invisible world. And he would surely see this as a serendipitous continuation of his life's work of bringing ancient mystical wisdom to modern confusions and longings.
Beauty isn't all about just nice loveliness. Beauty is about more rounded, substantial becoming. So I think beauty in that sense is about an emerging fullness, a greater sense of grace and elegance, a deeper sense of depth, and also a kind of homecoming for the enriched memory of your unfolding life.
The Inner Landscape of Beauty, John O'Donoghue's Vision. I'm Krista Tippett. This is On Being from APM, American Public Media. Anankara was published in 1997, and it became an international bestseller. John O'Donoghue's final work, a collection of blessings, was published posthumously. He was born in 1956 in County Clare in Western Ireland. Historically, this part of the world was a crucible of Celtic Christianity, merging a strong sense of mystery with a passionate embrace of nature, the body, and the senses. The divine is understood as manifest everywhere in everything. John O'Donoghue entered seminary at a young age and was a Catholic priest for 19 years. But in the 1980s, he went to Germany to study the philosophy of Hegel. He eventually left the priesthood and devoted himself full-time to meditating and writing on beauty, friendship, and how the visible and the invisible, the material and the spiritual, intertwine in human experience. Tell me a little bit more about where you come from and what formed you, what just began to form you to come to this spiritual perspective and philosophical and poetic perspective that you have now.
Well, I suppose I was blessed by being born into an amazing landscape in the west of Ireland.
Yes.
And it's the Burren region, which is limestone. And it's a bare limestone landscape. And I often think that the forms of the limestone are so abstract and aesthetic. And it is as if they were all laid down by some wild, surrealistic kind of deity. So soon, being a child and coming out into that, it was waiting like a huge, wild invitation to extend your imagination. And then it's right on the edge of the ocean as well. So the conversation, an ancient conversation between the ocean and the stone going on.
You can appreciate why I can't duplicate that. The lyrical Irish brogue was as much a part of John and his content of his spirit as what he wrote. Was John O'Donoghue an emerging UU? Certainly not officially, coming from a Catholic tradition, but he certainly migrated heavily and resonated heavily with many of our principles. In short, he loved and was deeply inspired by the landscape of his homeland and was environmentally active to protect the raw natural landscape of Western Ireland from development. He clearly advocated the principle of our role in the independent web of existence. Second, although a nominal Catholic Christian, his own depth of thought led him to value the common humanity in all of us, regardless of religion or tribe. He was truly a Celtic mystic at his core. He strongly promoted ecumenism, which is the cooperation of all religions through interdenominational organizations to cooperate on matters of mutual concern. Third, his view of personhood was deeply rooted in the belief that we are each divine, that our education should bring forth this divinity through the ethical expression of our talents. He thought that the left-brain nature of academic education and corporate life largely failed to balance right and left brain, that the senses were just as important as the cognitions in our training. He advocated the use of pedagogical and meditative learning based in ethics and life celebrating activity. He felt that modern formal education was boring and produced robotic and soul-driven conformism by and large. Education and work should engage the imagination and our senses in his view. He was also deeply concerned about social injustice, stemming from the belief that we are all divine, that each of us not only has an opportunity but an obligation to bring this divinity to life, that each of us, through our talents, express the divine within us, but to do so with deep integrity and ethics. He deplored the all too common misuse of talents and the service of greed and power. It'd be interesting to hear what he might have to say in today's world. He loved the disenfranchised and the poor, and spent much of his speaking life talking to corporate and political leaders around the world, encouraging them to address the concerns of those people. If he were here today, what would he say in that lyrical Irish brogue? First, he would say to us, recognize the divine in each of us, in you. While being an anamkara, a soul friend to someone else, he would say, first and foremost, to give that friendship to yourself. A soul friend is an intimate person who knows you, that you know yourself through their eyes. But more importantly, he believed that each of us needed also to be a soul friend to ourselves. Second, I think he would say to us, display your talents with joy and imagination. Do not be afraid. Have courage. Have celebration. He would do this in the honor of deep integrity. He would want us to each express that divinity and those talents with a deep integrity and ethical perspective. In the summer of 2015, I had the opportunity to spend a week with a dear friend of John O'Donoghue's, who in his own right is an accomplished Irish historian and speaker by the name of Gareth Higgins. Here's what Gareth wrote to me upon learning of John's death, with permission. John O'Donoghue was my friend. We have been getting to know each other for almost 4 years now, a lifetime in our transient world. The very world that John's words sought to slow down. I felt that we had, in some sense, adopted each other as compadres on the spiritual journey. A 50-something former priest taking into his life a 30-something former evangelical. Both of us bound by our common Irish heritage, love of cinema, and fondness for sipping what he insisted on referring to as firewater. We spent many hours talking, eating together, and engaging in our two favorite pursuits, whiskey and talking about the meaning of movies. He had a way with words that made you feel whole again. He created a space with language, both spoken and written, that felt like home you never knew you were missing, but now never wanted to leave. His work on retrieving the earthiness of Celtic spirituality and helping make sense of it in a postmodern world is so profound that its impact has not yet been fully felt. It represents something rare in a consumerist world, a work of art that will outlast its author. He managed also to write with the utmost seriousness and care for language, making his books the kind that you read slowly, savoring each page. Meanwhile, his public talks were characterized by an indelicate Irish charm and the kind of wit that leads to laughter so deep it makes you feel like you belong. What you may not know is that in addition to his ministry in the Catholic priesthood and latterly as a writer and speaker, he was a serious environmental activist, helping to spearhead a small group that successfully prevented the despoilment of the Burren, one of Ireland's most stunning natural landscapes. He put his reputation on the line to save something worth preserving, even being prepared to go to prison to do so. In his activism, as well as his writing and speaking, and most of all, in his life, he wanted people to have shelter from the storms of their lives. When I once told him of my own struggles with serious depression and anxiety, he clapped his hands together in a gesture of defiance and almost shouted at me, "May those feckin' devils stay far from your door and never touch you again. You are worth far more than you think." His presence in my life made me believe it. May it be so for all of us. Now if you'll stand and let's sing our final hymn, number 348, Guide My People.